Hello, Mr. Daniel Cowan, who is running for the 11th District U.S. House of Representatives. I'm Trenton Adams, and welcome to the Cherokee County Republican Party candidate interviews. Thank you for taking the time out of your campaign to participate in this interview process. We've extended this invitation to all candidates in this race and sourced questions from the CCRP membership. We have found that it has been an asset for voters in making their decision. The video will appear on the Cherokee County GOP website and will be shared on social media. The interview will be shown unedited in its entirety. For the interview, we will ask you a number of questions but can offer no prompting. There are no right or wrong answers, only your answers. And we ask each candidate the same questions. If this is all right with you, I'll have everyone introduce themselves, and then I'll ask Rick to begin asking the questions.
We're good to go.
Rick Davies, CCRP Chairman.
Harry Abrams.
Are you for or against a national ID card? Please explain your position.
Yeah, I believe that that it's important to have identification when it comes to being able to control who's voting, what public services we're giving to legal versus illegal aliens in our country. So, yes, I would be for an ID card.
What is your position on the Federal Reserve Bank? What is the biggest reform you would make to the Federal Reserve, and how would you achieve it?
Sure. So as a businessman, I know it's important to have control over monetary supply. My problem with the Federal Reserve right now is that I believe that it's controlled more by politics than it is by business people. So my changes are, I believe that we ought to be adding not just politicians or politically slanted economists, but business people to manage our money, our nation's monetary supply. We can't just openly print out money and think that that will escape all problems our country faces. At some point we have to allow leaders to lead through problems. And the leadership of the Fed right now, being a little bit more politically minded rather than business minded, I think, feels that they can buy our way out of problems.
What is your view of the balance of power in Washington among the executive, judicial, and legislative branches?
I'm very clear on the balances of power as is stated in the Constitution. I'm also clear that I think that, you know, in three parts, people are trampling on our Constitution right now. But the other side of that is it's important to know that the office that I'm running for, Congress, does have a role in that. While we blame a lot on President Obama for his executive powers and overreaching on policies, you know, we also have to say that Congress controls the purse strings in our government. And so, I mean, I was looking at interesting stats today, for example, that our 2016 federal spending is at the highest level of any time during the Obama administration, which is scary considering we have a Republican-controlled Congress. And, you know, Congress, as the Constitution has divvied out the ability for Congress to control our bank account, is effectively funding Obama's legacy. And I have problems with that.
The executive branch has more than 60 armed bureaucracies, including the EPA, Department of Education, and the USDA. Yet the Constitution makes no mention of a federal police force. Please explain your position on the armed federal agencies controlled by the executive branch.
Sure. So, and by saying that, I'm assuming. Well, I guess I can't assume. So, I believe that there is a need to have a national FBI, you know, forces like that. But I also think it's important to state that they're not political agencies. A big problem that we've had over the Obama administration is that they have allowed those agencies to become political animals and actually part of the political machine to impose what I believe is a democratic leaning policy. Those of us who stand up for conservative rights, and it's very well documented that, you know, that they have come out against conservatives much more than they've gone against Democrats. Another prime example of that is just look what's happening at the national level, the presidential election. If that had been a Republican who was running, who had classified information on a private server, and the FBI was investigating it, that person would no longer be a presidential candidate because they would be in jail. So I believe we should have a national oversight on some of that, but it cannot be a political force. And unfortunately, right now, we've allowed Obama to hijack that, and I'd have a major problem with that.
What gun control laws and policy do you support?
You know, I'm a proud owner of weapons, so I can tell you that I firmly believe that the Constitution allows us with the right to arm ourselves and to protect ourselves. And if you read, I mean, I live in Kennesaw, Georgia. Actually, I live in unincorporated Cobb, but very close to Kennesaw, Georgia. You know, Kennesaw, we have one of the few, we were one of the first jurisdictions to actually adopt where everyone had to own a gun. But if you look at what criminal rates are in places like Kennesaw, we're one of the safest cities in the state of Georgia. Because people know that in Kennesaw, like myself, I have a concealed carry permit, that, you know, there's a high likelihood that if you go into, and in fact there was a story about people going into a Waffle House to rob it. And there were people who were openly carrying their sidearms, and people decided that that was not a good idea. And so, you know, I believe that the Constitution and our founding fathers fought with their blood to give us the ability to arm and protect ourselves. So.
Would you support a federal law permitting the right to carry a firearm across state lines?
Yeah, so universal reciprocity, I agree with it. And actually, so I understand the downside of it, because you have some states, like, for example, I believe Vermont, which doesn't require someone to have a permit to carry a gun, right? And so I understand by saying imposing universal reciprocity would require Vermont to perhaps start issuing permits. So I understand that. But I also believe that the only real way for us to protect our right to bear arms is for states' licenses to be recognized throughout the entire country. Because if I live in, for example, I lived for a while in Missouri, which is right up against Illinois. Illinois has very strict gun laws, and we all know kind of what's happening with crime there. In Missouri, you know, you can get a concealed carry. You have to get some, you know, it's a little different than Georgia, but you can get a concealed carry. The way that we open up and allow citizens in our country to carry arms is when people from Missouri can carry their guns across the border and carry under a lawful state license, that will make it very difficult for Illinois to restrict that right for its citizens. So I believe that we should allow universal reciprocity.
Would you support immigration reform that includes securing the United States borders?
That's a joke question. Absolutely. Absolutely. Look, the first word in immigration reform is we must enforce our laws. Let's just start there. We are a nation of laws. Our Constitution is built upon a consent of power that we allow the government to govern by, which is the rule of law. We have laws on the books now that control what we do with people who illegally overstay their visas or who cross over the southern border of our country illegally. Unfortunately, we're not forcing jurisdictions, and federally, Obama is allowing the federal government to just forgive those laws. So absolutely, I believe we must secure the border and we must enforce the laws. We can talk about it being building a wall, but it's more than that. We must enforce our laws.
What is an inalienable right?
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as was defined out by our forefathers. I believe we have the freedom that our forefathers fought for was our ability to stand up for what we believe in. I'm a Christian. I believe in Christ. Our ability to own property and not have a threat that the government will come take that property away from me. And my ability to be successful in business, to raise a family how I want to raise a family, and be a responsible citizen of this country. I believe those are inalienable rights.
The right to life is a core principle of Republican Party values. What are your exceptions in life?
So let me start off with just kind of telling you why this is personal to me. All right. So my wife and I actually had a child who we found out early on had a congenital diaphragmatic hernia, and we were advised at the time that some people take the step of having an abortion at that point, because while it's survivable, there are often other things that are underlying a diaphragmatic hernia that are, syndromes and other things that cause that. And so my wife and I made the decision that we were, we would stand by our faith and that we wanted to have the child. And we actually went to a hospital that specifically specialized on a technique that gave our child the best chance to live. And our child was born and was actually progressing, and then literally died in my wife and my arms 6 days after she was born. And the girl was actually named after my wife. It was Caitlin Renee Cowan. My wife's middle name is Renee. And so this is a very personal issue for me. And because the aftermath, anybody who's experienced that understands that the aftermath of that is brokenness. And I literally lived that with my family. I mean, my marriage was broken. My wife didn't leave the house for months. We actually moved because she didn't want to go back to the same house without having a kid in his arms. And it's part of why I'm so passionate about things like Planned Parenthood and use of my tax dollars to fund things that I find reprehensible. So my stance on abortion is that it's morally wrong, that it's against my biblical principles, and I stand for that. Now, I will tell you there's one exception that I think I think it's a difficult place to be in, and that's the real threat to a mother's life, where she must decide, I die or the baby dies. And at that point, that would be the only exception that I would even remotely consider on it. I mean, look, I have friends who are infertile, who go to China to adopt babies. So, as a businessman, I understand supply and demand. I understand, look, a life is precious. And there are a lot of loving parents who do not have children. And if we get the adoption system correct, this whole issue goes away. This whole issue goes away.
Public office is not a career, but a calling to represent American citizens. Will you sponsor a House bill to abolish congressional retirement?
Yeah. So, this is a statement that comes directly from a lot that I believe. Look, our founding fathers, right after the Constitutional Convention, right, when they were appointing George Washington as president, he was standing up and he was serving, and they were giving him the offer of maybe, people calls for you to be a dictator and all this stuff. And, President Washington, he really showed great courage when he said, look, I understand that there are many people in this great nation who can serve as well as I can, maybe better than I can. So I believe fundamentally term limits was understood, and that it's needed, and it was demonstrated by our first president. The other side of that question is that Congress used to be service when then you had to return back home and take care of your crops and those things, and those days have changed greatly. I believe that as a country we need to adopt term limits, and I'll tell you that I personally will abide by term limits. I believe that's core to changing the culture of Washington. People ought to go up there, serve for a season, come back, and live with the laws they inflict on everyone else. On the other side of that, I also believe that, and this goes along with inflicting laws on others. Republicans, just as bad as Democrats, we fund Obamacare. So why is it that Congress is not subject to Obamacare? We rob the Social Security Trust Fund. So why is it that Congress is not paying into Social Security and has its retirement tied up on the same fund that it is robbing? I believe 100% that we are a government of the people, by the people, for the people. And as such, and because our leaders should be servant leaders, I believe they should be subjected to as much, if not more, than we the people are subjected to with our treasurer.
Do you support congressional term limits, and why or why not?
I could say a joke and say no, but absolutely. I believe that was the vision. It was an implied vision within government. Again, President Washington, he talked about that vision, and he showed leadership around that vision. Then if you look even statewide, I think Mark Levin's book, he talks about there's only one state that doesn't have term limits in our entire country. I think it's Utah. I think that's what he says. It's Utah that doesn't. And I know people make the argument, they say, well, we do have term limits. It's every election season. But I can tell you, as someone who's running against a candidate who has taken about 60% of his money from Washington PACs and other places to finance his campaign, that's not true term limits. It's an uphill battle. I think Mark Levin's book goes on to say that there was greater turnover in the Soviet Politburo and the House of Lords, again, the instrument that our forefathers fought to exit, than there is in the U.S. House of Representatives. So our system's broken, and I believe we have to implement term limits to fix it.
Have you read the current Republican Party platform adopted at the 2012 RNC Convention, and if so, what principle best describes you?
The platform, the 2012 convention. So I read the Republican conservative statements, all right, at it. And I believe in a lot of them. I believe, they talk about education, believe in school choice, believe in local education, believe in the right to free enterprise and free markets. So those stances that I believe in. The problem I have, and I don't know if this is specifically answering your question, and it's really a lot why I'm running, is that I have become so jaded that Republicans seem to spend as much, if not more, than Democrats. And I found it very hard to distinguish between conservative principle. I mean, the word conservative has become ubiquitous, but I found it very hard to distinguish between what people in Washington say is conservatism versus what I believe it is, and what I think the 11th District believe it is. So I have to be I want to be very careful how I answer that. And it's really just because I'm a conservative. And when you get to a situation where the Republican Party is allowing Obama to spend more money this year than he has in his entire administration, and we control that, then I'm not sure any of those ideals that they put in 2012 really hold. And that's why people like me are running.
Do you believe money has a corrupting influence in politics? If so, what steps should be taken to curb it?
Okay, so I'm a Christian, and the Bible, I think what Jesus talks about money, I mean, that's one of the, I think that and grace are the two most common things that Jesus actually talks about. The Bible's pretty clear about money's corrupting effects. It says, you cannot serve two masters. And so, absolutely, I believe money is corrupting in politics. I also, however, believe in free speech. Okay? So, the money that's corrupting in politics for me goes a little bit along the lines of my term limit answer. And that term limit answer would be on where our congressmen, our representatives can go up, can get money from PACs that affect their vote, and then they get employed after a couple year sit on the sideline to become lobbyists. I think that's problematic. And so under the current system, absolutely money is corrupting our politicians. If we had term limits, however, so that people understood this couldn't be a career. People were going up there for a season to serve. Then I believe money is free speech on that service, because people aren't up there to spend their lifetime jockeying for a better office. They're up there to serve. And it's not our position to curtail free speech on it. So I have to divvy it based on term limits.
For over 40 years, women have had the legal protection to seek an abortion. Many object to this, citing religious belief. Do you believe that it is acceptable as a policymaker to cite your religious beliefs in crafting social policy that affects Americans of all faiths?
Well, I am who I am, and a big part of who I am is my belief in a sovereign Lord. So, my Bible tells me that I was created in His image, and I believe that. It also tells me that I fail, and I'm a sinner, and I need a Savior. So it also tells me that I'm not perfect. So there's a grace component, a compassion component, as well as an understanding of a divine entity who is. So I believe absolutely if you're expecting someone to go up to Washington, D.C. or go into any office and to pretend they're not who they are, then you'll never know who you actually elected. And therefore, I believe citing your beliefs, because you are electing me based on who I am. And a big part of who I am is my walk with Jesus. So I believe that, yeah, it's impossible to separate my faith from who I am.
Last year, the Supreme Court issued an opinion legalizing gay marriage. Are you okay with this? If not, what steps are you willing to take to reverse this?
All right, so let's. I think it's time just to kind of cut to brass tacks on that. And that is, the term marriage, an overtly religious term, has been absolutely hijacked, I believe, by the political establishment we have today. Marriage is a divine union. Again, with my faith, going back to with my faith, is a divine union that is appointed by God. And it is not up to man to decide how that is divvied out, because God has laid that out abundantly clear in scriptures that He's given us. So first answer, no, I do not support same-sex unions at all. I believe that marriage is a divinely appointed instrument, and it's not up to us to rewrite God's word.
What is the single most important reform, besides repealing Obamacare, that needs to be made to get our fiscal house in order?
Yeah. So I'm going to go back to something we talked about, because I believe that underneath a lot of other issues, our willingness to allow people to go up to Washington with a view that this can be their career is problematic, because it affects how they vote on everything. It affects whether they go up there to vote 11th District values, or they go up there to vote Washington, D.C. values, because they're jockeying for a better position in the next speaker's leadership dole. So for me, underneath everything, term limits is something that our country must adopt, absolutely must adopt. Because from term limits, to me, you'll have people who go up for a season again, who understand that they must live with those laws they inflict on everyone else. And if you have that mindset, you're not going to vote to mortgage our children's future. You're not going to vote to restrict your right to bear arms. You're not going to vote that way, because you have to live in the sea. You're not going to vote to bankrupt Social Security or our entitlement system, because you have to live in it. Right now, we've allowed a system where they don't have to live in it. And that's not we the people power. that's them voting Washington, D.C. values. So I believe term limits solves a lot.
Do you support a balanced budget amendment?
Yeah, so as a businessman, look, as a businessman, and people can look at me skeptically, because as a businessman, we understand there's always a place for debt in creating the most value for our shareholders. The problem in a public situation with that, and de Tocqueville actually wrote about this when he said that the U.S. democracy will work until its representatives understand that they can pay off, they can bribe the electorate. And we live in a fallen world. And unfortunately, that time in Washington has come, where statesmen no longer lead for what's best in the country's mind, but they lead to try to pander to a certain portion of the electorate to continue to be elected and gain that pension that we've already discussed and whatnot. So absolutely, I believe that we must adopt a balanced budget amendment, because we as humans and as both sinners, but also we as Americans have proven that our government is incapable of fiscally monitoring and controlling itself.
Would you vote to re-elect Paul Ryan as Speaker? And if not, could you give us the name of a person you see as most fit to hold the office?
Yeah, I'll tell you. So early on, I was a big fan of Paul Ryan. I believe John Boehner was the biggest Christmas gift to Democrats. Nancy Pelosi is like, man, she was loving life when Boehner sat across from her. So I was a fan of Paul Ryan. I will tell you though, that 2015 omnibus spending bill, I have major problems with it. I've already told you that, in 2016 we're spending more money. The federal government is spending more money than it has any time in the Obama administration. That omnibus bill, it helps secure Obama's legacy, which is not a legacy any of us should be proud of. So, in all truthfulness and humility, if I go up, if I'm elected to Congress, I'll need to sit down with him and lay out my concerns about who I thought Paul Ryan was versus what I saw in that 2015 omnibus spending bill. And I will tell you, if the Paul Ryan that I learned, I don't know Paul Ryan. I've never run for political office before. I'm a business guy, but I'm pretty good at judging people. I've been successful in business doing it, pretty good at judging. If I sense that the Paul Ryan who I'm sitting across has actually become part of the problem, which is the omnibus spending bill type Paul Ryan, then there's no way in the world I'd support it.
How do you plan to reduce corporate inversions?
Corporate inversions. So as a SEC reporting officer, and I run strategy and stuff for publicly traded companies. A corporate inversion. My assumption when you say corporate inversion, there are two things that it can be. One thing it can be is basically taking money offshore and in a corporate sense, taking money offshore and taking away sort of a working class of people. And if that is indeed what you're talking about, I think it's pretty easy to correct that. In fact, our corporate tax structure that we have in place today is not very beneficial for America, and it's not definitely beneficial for corporations, because we have great. It gives us great motivation to take jobs offshore, to keep money offshore, because bringing it back is a punitive damage for us. In fact, there's a lot of money that's stranded. We in corporate America, and in my previous role, we spent tens of millions of dollars just trying to find ways to get money back on shore, because it's so difficult to do it without getting tripped up on all the multiple tax jurisdictions. So from my standpoint, fix the tax code. I mean, most of the time corporations enter a year, because we haven't done a budget or whatever in the government, enter a year not really understanding what the tax code actually looks like. And fix the tax code. Make it simple, make it flat, give us the ability to be competitive. And I think that's how you fix it. I think you make America competitive through a simplified tax code. And at that point, American companies will flock money onshore. I believe in free market. America must make itself business friendly. That's how we solve the problem.
Do you support the popular vote or the Electoral College, and why?
Yeah. So I support, I mean, look, I understand the Constitution, and I understand the Constitution has a stated mechanism for electing our president, right? I also understand that ways that our Constitution has said that elected offices should be, the electoral process for offices should be handled have been changed. For example, senators, right? Senators used to be, under the Constitution, original view, senators were to be elected from state legislatures, right? Now senators are elected from people. I believe that in today's day and age, where information is readily available, and our ability to have a national election is pretty easy, that the voice of the people should matter. So I would say that as we the people, as one of the people who is running for this, because I think our government has gotten off track, I would say that any party that ignores a populist view of an election is destined to destroy itself. And maybe that's the answer. Maybe it's not a policy change, because inherently we have Darwinism, and inherently any party that rejects a populist election will probably destroy itself.
What have you done in the last year to save money at work and at home?
I've tried to convince, well, actually, here's a real easy one. Target is allowing unisex bathrooms, so we don't shop at Target anymore. And I can promise you, Target was a very expensive part of our budget, because my wife seemed to like Target a lot, and we don't enter it anymore. So that has saved me a lot of money. Look, I'm a big believer in budgeting. All right. In fact, in my church, we run this. Dave Ramsey has this Financial Peace University, which talks about spend cash for everything. Don't use credit cards. Have line of sight. Real pain when you purchase, right? Real pain when you purchase. And we're believers in that. So in my home, we budget. I know that's a novel idea. We budget. We understand how difficult it is to earn money, and therefore, when we earn it, it's got to be a very deliberate reason why we spend it, and we map that out. We're also, as I said, Christians, so we understand the rule of first fruit. So, for us, we believe that giving to the church is something, and when you're methodical, and that's not just a line item, that's the number one line item. That's your first fruit that you do. That changes your view on money greatly. And so I would say, we adhere to kind of that financial peace view in a home. Now, in a business, I'll tell you that I am a spending hawk, and that's one thing that, look, as a business person, you're always working for someone. It doesn't. You can be the CEO of a company. You're working for someone. And businessmen in sustainable businesses and good businesses always keep their shareholders in mind. So, and a lot of our compensation in the corporate world is actually compensated through stock. So it's compensated the same way as our shareholders. So very much, we budget methodically. We go beyond that. in business world, we put strategic plan. I ran strategy in our company along with running a big part of the P&L. So we put a strategic plan, and we don't deviate from the strategic plan unless there's something, unforeseen that really happens. And that strategic plan includes a firm budgeting process, which tells you we understand that you have growth capital and you've got maintenance capital, but we also understand that every expense is a discretionary expense. And our job is to be frugal with that money for our shareholders. So I will tell you, my existence as a businessman and corporate executive is about having a good view and a good pulse on how to be frugal with money.
Are you currently a member of the Cherokee County Republican Party?
I am not a member of the Cherokee County Republican Party. I actually live in Cobb County. So as I said in the previous thing, I live in West Cobb, just outside the border of Kennesaw. So I'm not a member of the Cherokee Republican Party.
We would like our elected Republican leaders to help us grow the party. Please briefly describe any significant efforts you have made in the past to support the Republican Party and/or Republican candidates locally, statewide, or nationally.
Okay, well, I'll say that why I'm sitting in this chair right now, I think is the most significant thing that we can do to save our party. Because my view is that our party has gotten way, way off track. We've allowed the word conservative to be hijacked. And getting back to the roots of being conservative, which is being fiscally conservative, believing in free markets, believing in people's right to privacy, people's right to live their life as they see fit. Those are core values of a Republican Party, but those are not core values of today's Republican Party. I do not believe. A big reason I'm running is because of that. So if you're asking, what do you think is the biggest effort you've done on that? I'll tell you, I'm running against an incumbent, but I'm running against an incumbent who has voted for spending bills, voted in a manner opposite of how he promised us he would vote when he went to Washington. And if we allow Republicans to do that, we will no longer have a Republican Party. And this is an investment. It's an investment from people who've donated money, but this is also a big investment for me too. And I'm not doing it for any sort of career ambitions. I'm doing it because I got 4 kids, 11 and below. I was raised in a conservative household. I was given access to the American dream that is built, its tenet is built on a conservative platform. And if we, the people, don't stand up, the Republican Party is toast. It's toast.
Have you ever been arrested or convicted of a crime excluding traffic offenses?
No, I've not. But I do want to say this because I take exception to it. I was pulled over by a cop. I had 1 speeding ticket. I was pulled over by a cop in Spartanburg, South Carolina on my way to Davidson College. And he gave me a ticket. I think it was going 10 over or something like that. And it was in a work zone, and the signs were not well marked. So I'll stand by that.
Have you ever been the subject of professional discipline or cited for breach of ethics or unprofessional conduct by any disciplinary committee, court, administrative agency, or other professional group?
I'm glad you didn't include my wife in that, because she probably would say that, no. No. No.
Well, thank you very much for being with us today. If
Yeah.
there's anything else you'd like to say to those watching?
Yeah, well, look, I'm running to be your congressman in the 11th district. I would very much appreciate your prayers. I'd very much appreciate your support, and I'd very much appreciate your vote on May 24th. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.